Brazil, 2024. Part 1. Love's First Bloom. Fortaleza, with its stunning coastline and warm tropical breezes, was not just a backdrop but a key character in the story of Gabriel and Isabela. The city's lively spirit, where modernity and tradition intertwined, mirrored the blossoming love that grew between these two young souls. They both hailed from devout Christian families who had long been part of the same close-knit church community. Their lives were steeped in the rhythms of faith, with Sundays dedicated to worship, prayer meetings, and the fellowship of their church family. It was within this sacred space that their paths first crossed, setting the stage for a love that would be as deep and enduring as their faith. Gabriel, a young man in his late 20s, had always been admired for his deep commitment to God and his community. He was the worship leader at their church, known for his powerful voice that could move even the hardest of hearts. Standing at the front of the congregation, guitar in hand, he led the church in songs of praise with a sincerity that resonated through every note. His connection with God was evident in the way he closed his eyes during worship, his face reflecting a peace that inspired those around him. Gabriel wasn't just a leader in name. He embodied the principles he sang about, living his life with a humility and grace that drew people to him. Isabela, on the other hand, was a young woman with a quiet strength. In her early 20s, she had a gentle spirit that belied a deep reservoir of faith and conviction. Isabela was deeply involved in the church's youth ministry, where she mentored younger girls and organized community outreach programs. She had a natural ability to make people feel seen and heard, and her presence brought a sense of calm to those around her. Her dark, wavy hair framed a face that was often lit up with a warm smile, especially when she was engaged in the work she believed God had called her to do. Their first encounter was not particularly remarkable, a casual introduction after a Sunday service, where they exchanged polite greetings and a few words about the sermon. But from that simple interaction, something began to stir in both of them. Over the following weeks, they found themselves gravitating towards each other at church events, their conversations growing longer and more meaningful. What began as a mutual respect for each other's dedication to their faith slowly blossomed into something more. A connection that felt as though it had been orchestrated by a divine hand. The church, with its high wooden beams and stained glass windows, became the backdrop for their burgeoning relationship. The sounds of worship, voices raised in song, the strumming of guitars, and the steady beat of drums provided the soundtrack to their love story. They would often stay after services, talking long into the afternoon about their dreams, their hopes, and their shared belief that God had a plan for their lives. There was an ease between them, a sense of belonging that felt as natural as breathing. As their relationship deepened, Gabriel and Isabela became inseparable. They spent their weekends exploring the city together, walking hand in hand along the golden sands of Praia do Futuro, their feet sinking into the warm, wet sand as the waves lapped at their ankles. Visiting the bustling markets where the vibrant colors of tropical fruits and the scent of freshly caught seafood filled the air, and sitting in small cafes in the historic center of Fortaleza, sharing quiet moments over cups of strong Brazilian coffee. Each moment together only solidified the bond that was growing between them. It wasn't long before they both realized that their relationship was something special, something blessed by God. They began talking about the future, envisioning a life together that was centered around their shared faith and values. Gabriel would often speak of his desire to build a family that was rooted in the teachings of the Bible, where love, respect, and devotion to God would be the foundation of their home. Isabela shared his vision, dreaming of a small house near the beach where they could raise their children in the warmth of God's love. Their relationship was not without its challenges, but these only served to strengthen their resolve. They were both passionate individuals, deeply committed to their own paths. Gabriel was devoted to his role as worship leader, a position that often required long hours of practice and preparation. Isabela, meanwhile, was pursuing a degree in theology, with the hope of one day becoming a pastor. The demands of their respective callings meant that they had to learn to balance their personal lives with their commitments to God and their community. Despite the occasional disagreement, they always found a way to come back to each other, guided by their faith and the belief that their relationship was part of a greater plan. Their love was not just a product of chance. It was something that had been nurtured and guided by the hand of God, who had brought them together for a purpose. The defining moment of their relationship came one evening at a beach service, a tradition their church held every few months. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the gathered congregation, Gabriel stood up to lead the final song of the night. The air was filled with the sound of waves crashing gently against the shore, mingling with the soft strumming of his guitar. As he sang, his eyes found Isabela in the crowd, her face illuminated by the fading light. When the song ended, Gabriel put down his guitar and walked over to where Isabela was standing. With the whole church looking on, he knelt down on one knee and, with a voice filled with emotion, asked her to marry him. The moment was perfect, as if the entire universe had conspired to bring them to that point. Isabela, tears of joy streaming down her face, said yes, and the congregation erupted into applause, their cheers echoing across the beach. It seemed like nothing could come between them, that their love was unshakable. But as life would have it, challenges began to creep in. Small disagreements that they once would have brushed aside began to fester, growing into larger issues that neither knew how to address. They were both so focused on their individual callings that they began to lose sight of the love that had brought them together. It was as if the very things that had once bonded them were now pulling them apart. One particularly heated argument over Gabriel's decision to accept a leadership role that would take him away from Fortaleza for several weeks became the tipping point. Harsh words were exchanged, words that couldn't be taken back. Hurt and frustrated, they both made the impulsive decision to separate, believing that some time apart might help them find clarity. It was a decision made in the heat of the moment, driven by pride and the inability to see past their own hurt. They parted ways, each convinced that they were doing what was best, but deep down, neither of them could shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. The love that had once been their greatest strength now felt like a distant memory, buried beneath the pain and confusion of their separation. But even in the darkest moments, there was a small flicker of hope, a quiet voice that whispered that this was not the end of their story, that God still had a plan for them, one that was far greater than they could ever imagine. Part 2. The silence of separation. When Gabriel and Isabela made the decision to part ways, they believed that the time apart would bring them clarity, perhaps even healing. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the silence between them grew, and the distance became more than just physical. Fortaleza, a city once brimming with shared memories and moments of joy, now seemed vast and lonely, each corner of the city echoing with what had been lost. Gabriel, though committed to his role as a worship leader, felt the weight of Isabela's absence in every note he sang, in every prayer he led. The once vibrant worship sessions now carried a tinge of melancholy, a subtle undercurrent of longing that even the congregation could sense. He began traveling more frequently, accepting invitations to lead worship services across Brazil, using the work as a distraction from the emptiness he felt. But no matter how far he traveled or how much he immersed himself in his work, he couldn't escape the memories of Isabela, their shared laughter, the quiet moments of understanding, the dreams they had once painted together in bright colors. Back in Fortaleza, Isabela threw herself into her studies with a fervor that bordered on obsession. She completed her theology degree and quickly began working on various projects within the church, especially focusing on her ministry for young women. She became a mentor to many, a beacon of strength and wisdom. To the outside world, She seemed to have it all together: a successful ministry, a respected position in the church, and a bright future ahead. But those closest to her could see the sadness in her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them. The truth was, no matter how much she accomplished, there was a void in her heart that nothing seemed to fill. The 2 years that followed their separation were marked by moments of doubt and reflection. Gabriel often found himself standing on the balcony of his small apartment, overlooking the bustling streets of Fortaleza, wondering if he had made the right decision. The nights were the hardest, when the quiet of the city amplified the silence in his heart. He would gaze out at the distant lights of the city, remembering the way Isabela's eyes would light up when they talked about their future. The ache of missing her was a constant companion, one that he couldn't shake, no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he was better off alone. Isabela, too, struggled with the silence. The moments of stillness in her apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating. She would often find herself reaching for her phone, wanting to call Gabriel, to hear his voice, to tell him about the little victories and the big challenges she was facing. But pride and fear held her back, the memory of their last argument still fresh in her mind. Instead, she would sit by the window, watching the world go by, her heart heavy with the weight of what might have been. Despite their best efforts to move on, neither Gabriel nor Isabela could bring themselves to start new relationships. Friends and family urged them to date, to find happiness with someone else, but neither could take that step. It wasn't just about loyalty. It was as if an invisible barrier kept them from even considering the possibility. They both knew, deep down, that their hearts still belonged to each other, no matter how much time had passed or how far apart they were. In the quiet moments, when they allowed themselves to be honest, they both prayed for guidance, asking God what they should do. Gabriel often found himself at the church late at night, alone with his thoughts and his prayers. The once comforting sanctuary now felt like a place of unanswered questions. He would sit at the altar, head bowed, whispering the same prayer over and over: God, if we're meant to be together, please show me the way. Isabela, too, sought solace in prayer, but the answers didn't come easily. She would walk along the beach at night, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. The same beach where Gabriel had proposed now felt like a place of lost dreams. She would kneel in the sand, the wind whipping through her hair, and cry out to God, asking for a sign, for anything that would bring her peace. But the waves offered no answers, and the wind carried her prayers out to sea, leaving her feeling more alone than ever. Yet, even in their darkest moments, there was a flicker of hope that neither could extinguish. It was a small, fragile thing, but it persisted. A quiet voice that whispered that their story wasn't over, that God had a plan that was far greater than their pain. They clung to that hope, even as the days turned into months and the months into years, waiting for the day when the silence would break and their paths would cross once again. The turning point came in the most unexpected way, through a series of coincidences that neither could have predicted. It was as if the universe, or perhaps something greater, was conspiring to bring them back together. The events that would soon unfold would not only challenge their faith, but also reaffirm the love that had never truly left their hearts. The time of separation was drawing to a close, and the stage was being set for a reunion that would be nothing short of miraculous. Part 3. A Divine Reunion. 2 years had passed since Gabriel and Isabela last saw each other, and in that time, life had continued its relentless march forward. The memories of their time together had become like faded photographs, still there, but softened around the edges by the passage of time. Yet, despite the years of separation, neither of them had been able to move on completely. They both felt an invisible pull, a thread that had never truly been severed. On a warm, bright morning in Fortaleza, The Pinto Martins Airport was alive with the energy of travelers moving in every direction, each with their own story, their own destination. The air was filled with the sounds of rolling suitcases, the hum of conversations in various languages, and the distant, soothing voice of announcements over the loudspeakers. For Gabriel and Isabela, this airport was the gateway to what they thought were separate journeys. Little did they know, God had other plans. Gabriel arrived at the airport with plenty of time to spare. He was scheduled to lead worship at a large Christian conference in Rio de Janeiro, an opportunity he had been looking forward to for weeks. As he navigated the busy terminal, his mind was focused on the upcoming event, but there was also a familiar undercurrent of melancholy. Airports always reminded him of Isabela, of the trips they had planned to take together but never did, of the future that had once seemed so certain. He tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. Meanwhile, Isabela was also making her way through the same terminal, her thoughts similarly preoccupied. She had been invited to speak at a women's retreat in Rio, an honor that filled her with both excitement and nerves. It was a big step for her ministry, a chance to reach a wider audience and share the lessons she had learned over the past few years. But beneath the surface, there was a sense of unease, a feeling she couldn't quite shake, as if something was about to happen that would change everything. As they each approached the security checkpoint, Gabriel and Isabela unknowingly found themselves just a few feet apart. The terminal was crowded, with people rushing to make their flights, but in that moment, time seemed to slow down. Gabriel, distracted by a text message on his phone, looked up just in time to see a familiar face in the crowd. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Isabela, fumbling through her purse for her boarding pass, suddenly felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching her. She glanced up, her eyes scanning the crowd, and there he was, Gabriel, standing just a few feet away, staring at her with a look of shock and disbelief. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise and chaos of the airport faded into the background, and all they could see was each other. It was Isabela who broke the silence first, offering a tentative smile. Gabriel responded in kind, his heart racing as he took a step towards her. The years of separation melted away in that instant, replaced by a flood of emotions, relief, joy, and a deep, aching longing that had never truly left. Isabela, Gabriel said softly, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and warmth. I can't believe it's you. Isabela nodded, still trying to process the coincidence that had brought them together. Gabriel, it's been so long. I didn't expect to see you here. They stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. The tension that had marked their last encounter was gone, replaced by a sense of peace that felt almost surreal. It was as if God had orchestrated this moment, bringing them together in the most unexpected of places. As they moved through security together, the conversation flowed more easily. They caught up on the past 2 years, sharing stories of their respective ministries and the paths they had taken. There was a genuine warmth in their exchange, a recognition that despite the time and distance, they still understood each other in a way that no one else did. When they reached their gate, the surprises continued. Gabriel checked his boarding pass and noticed that his seat was 17A. He glanced at Isabela's ticket and saw that she was in 17B. They exchanged a look of disbelief. What were the chances? Looks like we're sitting together, Gabriel said with a chuckle, trying to mask the excitement that was bubbling up inside him. Isabela smiled, shaking her head in amazement. This can't be a coincidence, she said softly. It feels like something bigger is at work here. As they boarded the plane and took their seats next to each other, the atmosphere between them was light and filled with a sense of wonder. They talked about their shared memories of Fortaleza, of the church that had brought them together, and of the dreams they had once had. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a deep, abiding connection that felt as natural as breathing. High above the clouds, as the plane soared towards Rio de Janeiro, Gabriel and Isabela found themselves drawn into a conversation that went beyond the surface. They spoke about their regrets, about the mistakes they had made, and about the lessons they had learned during their time apart. It was a conversation they had both needed to have for a long time, and now, in the quiet of the airplane cabin, they finally had the space to be honest with each other. Gabriel confessed that he had never stopped thinking about Isabela, that no matter how busy he had been, she was always in his thoughts. He told her about the loneliness he had felt, even when surrounded by people, and how he had tried to fill the void with work but had never succeeded. Isabela listened quietly, her heart aching as she realized that she had felt the same. She admitted that she had never been able to move on, that she had always felt like something was missing from her life. And now, sitting next to Gabriel, she understood what that something was. As the plane began its descent into Rio, Gabriel turned to Isabela, his expression serious but filled with hope. "Isabela," he said, his voice steady, "I don't think this is just a coincidence. I think God brought us back together for a reason. Maybe we're not done yet." Isabela met his gaze, her eyes filled with emotion. "I think you're right," she replied softly. "Maybe this is our second chance." By the time the plane touched down in Rio, Gabriel and Isabela both knew that something had shifted. The past was behind them, and the future was once again filled with possibility. The coincidences that had brought them together were too numerous to ignore. They were a sign, a divine intervention that had opened the door to a new beginning. As they stepped off the plane and into the bustling city of Rio de Janeiro, they felt a sense of peace that they hadn't experienced in years. Their journey was far from over, but they were no longer walking it alone. With God at the center of their lives, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had been given a second chance to build the life they had always dreamed of together. Part 4. A Journey of Rediscovery. The airplane hummed with a soft, steady rhythm as it cruised high above the clouds, carrying its passengers towards Rio de Janeiro. The world outside was a sea of white, with the sun casting a golden glow over the endless expanse of clouds below. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was calm, with the occasional clink of a glass or the murmur of conversation breaking the peaceful silence. Gabriel and Isabela sat side by side, their seats nestled together in the middle of the plane. The initial excitement of their reunion had given way to a quieter, more introspective mood as they settled into the flight. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in for both of them. They were together again, after all this time, in a way that felt both surreal and deeply meaningful. The coincidences that had brought them to this point were too powerful to ignore, and as they sat there, they couldn't help but feel that they were on the verge of something significant. For a while, they simply sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Gabriel stared out the window, watching as the clouds drifted by, his mind racing with memories of the past and hopes for the future. Isabela, too, was deep in thought, her heart filled with a mix of emotions. Joy, fear, hope, and uncertainty all mingled together in a way that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Finally, Gabriel turned to Isabela, breaking the silence with a question that had been on his mind since they first met again in the airport. "Isabela," he began, his voice soft but steady, "do you ever wonder why we ended up here? I mean, after everything, why now?" Isabela looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same questions that had been swirling in her own mind. "I've thought about that a lot," she admitted. "It's like, all this time, we were being led back to each other, even when we didn't realize it. Maybe we weren't ready before, but now it feels different." Gabriel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I've always believed that God has a plan for us," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "But it wasn't until I saw you again that I realized how much I still care about you. And I think I think maybe this is our chance to make things right." Isabella smiled, a soft, hopeful smile that Gabriel hadn't seen in a long time. "I think so too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just about us, Gabriel. It's about trusting God's plan, even when we don't understand it. Maybe all of this was meant to bring us closer to Him, as well as to each other." Gabriel reached out and took Isabella's hand, holding it gently between his own. The simple gesture spoke volumes, conveying everything he couldn't put into words: the regret he felt for the time they had lost, the love that had never faded, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start again. As they sat there, hand in hand, the conversation began to flow more freely. They talked about the past, about the good times they had shared, and the mistakes they had made. They spoke of their regrets, but also of the lessons they had learned during their time apart. Gabriel confessed that he had been too focused on his work, too caught up in his own ambitions to see what was truly important. Isabella admitted that she had let her pride get in the way, that she had been too stubborn to forgive when she should have. But as they spoke, they also began to see the ways in which their separation had allowed them to grow. Gabriel had become a more thoughtful, reflective person, someone who understood the importance of balance and humility. Isabella, too, had changed. She had become stronger, more independent, and more certain of her own worth. They were no longer the same people they had been 2 years ago, and in many ways, that was a good thing. As the plane continued its journey, the conversation shifted to the future. They spoke of their dreams, of the life they still hoped to build together. Gabriel talked about his desire to continue his work in ministry, but in a way that allowed for more time with the people he loved. Isabella shared her vision for expanding her ministry, for reaching more young women and helping them find their own paths in faith. They both realized that their dreams were not only compatible, but complementary. Together, they could achieve more than they ever could alone. The conversation flowed easily, with moments of laughter and moments of quiet reflection. It was as if they were rediscovering each other, learning to appreciate the person each had become during their time apart. They were no longer the young couple who had once been in love. They were something more, two people who had been tested by time and distance and had come out stronger on the other side. As the plane began its descent into Rio de Janeiro, Gabriel and Isabella both felt a sense of peace settling over them. The city's sprawling coastline came into view, with the iconic Sugarloaf Mountain rising majestically in the distance. The sight of it filled them both with a sense of anticipation. This was a new beginning, a chance to start fresh in a city that was as vibrant and full of life as they were feeling in that moment. Gabriel turned to Isabella, his expression serious but filled with warmth. "Isabella," he said, "I don't want to make the same mistakes again. I want to build something real with you, something that will last. But I know it's going to take time, and I'm willing to be patient. What do you think?" Isabella looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, and felt her heart swell with emotion. "Gabriel, I want that too," she replied. "I've spent so much time trying to figure out what went wrong before, but now I see that it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have this chance now, and I don't want to waste it." As the plane touched down, they both knew that they were stepping into a new chapter of their lives, one that was filled with hope, faith, and the promise of a love that had been tested and had endured. They had been given a second chance, not just at their relationship, but at building the life they had always dreamed of, together, with God at the center of it all. Part 5. A New Dawn of Love. As Gabriel and Isabella stepped off the plane and into the vibrant, pulsing energy of Rio de Janeiro, they were immediately enveloped by the city's unique rhythm. The air was warm and fragrant, carrying with it the distant sounds of the ocean waves crashing against the shore, mingling with the hum of the city's traffic and the lively chatter of its people. The contrast between the serene, introspective moments on the plane and the lively, colorful atmosphere of Rio was stark, but it felt like a perfect metaphor for the transition they were about to make in their lives. The city welcomed them with open arms, its streets alive with a kaleidoscope of sights, sounds, and smells. As they navigated the bustling streets, walking side by side, they were struck by how different everything felt now that they were together again. Every corner of the city seemed to hold the promise of a new adventure, a new beginning. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting long, warm shadows as they made their way towards their hotel, where they would be staying for the duration of the conference and retreat. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Gabriel and Isabela attended their respective events, each one filled with the passion and purpose that had always driven them. But this time, there was something different, an added sense of joy, of fulfillment, knowing that at the end of each day, they would come back to each other. Their days were busy, but their evenings were spent exploring the city together, rediscovering the connection that had never truly been broken. One evening, after a particularly successful day at the conference, Gabriel suggested that they take a walk along the famous Copacabana beach. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and purple as the last rays of sunlight danced across the waves. The beach was alive with activity, families playing in the sand, couples strolling hand in hand, and vendors selling everything from colorful beachwear to fresh coconut water. As they walked along the shore, the sand warm beneath their feet, Gabriel and Isabela found themselves falling into an easy rhythm, the conversation flowing effortlessly between them. They talked about their dreams, their plans for the future, and the life they hoped to build together. There was a sense of clarity now, a mutual understanding that they had been given a second chance, and they were determined not to let it slip away. At one point, they stopped and sat down on the sand, watching as the waves gently rolled in and out, the water glistening in the fading light. Gabriel turned to Isabela, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he began, his voice soft, "I used to think that our love story was over, that we had missed our chance. But now I see that it was just a chapter in a much bigger story. A story that God has been writing all along." Isabela smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "I believe that too," she said. "I think we needed this time apart to grow, to become the people we were meant to be. And now that we're here, together, I can see how everything we went through has led us to this moment. It's like we were always meant to find our way back to each other." Gabriel squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Isabela," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I promise that I will never take you for granted again. I want to build a life with you, a life that honors God and the love that He has given us. Will you walk this path with me?" Isabela's eyes filled with tears of happiness as she nodded. "Yes, Gabriel," she whispered. "I want that more than anything." They sat there for a while longer, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky awash with the soft glow of twilight. In that moment, they felt a sense of peace and contentment that they had both longed for. The past was behind them, and the future was bright with promise. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they stood up and continued their walk along the beach, their hearts light and their spirits lifted. The sounds of the city faded into the background, leaving only the gentle lapping of the waves and the soft murmur of their voices as they talked about the life they would build together. In the days that followed, Gabriel and Isabela made a promise to each other, and to God, that they would approach their relationship with renewed commitment and faith. They would communicate openly, forgive freely, and always keep God at the center of their lives. They knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but they also knew that they were stronger together, and with God's guidance, they could overcome anything. Their time in Rio became the foundation for the new life they would build. They returned to Fortaleza with a sense of purpose, ready to face whatever the future held with confidence and love. Their story was not just about two people finding their way back to each other. It was a testament to the power of faith, the importance of growth, and the belief that true love, when nurtured by God, can withstand even the greatest of trials. And so, as Gabriel and Isabella embarked on this new chapter of their lives, they did so with the profound understanding that they were exactly where God intended them to be, together, stronger than ever before. Their love had been tested by time, distance, and trials, but it had not only survived, it had been refined and deepened. With hearts wide open and faith that had grown unshakable, they were ready to embrace the future. Hand in hand, they knew they were walking a path illuminated by divine purpose, a journey they would continue together, blessed and guided by God's unwavering love forever. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.